It was a quiet morning in the courtroom, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the faint scent of old paper and wood polish lingered in the room. Everyone was seated, lawyers shuffling papers, the bailiff standing stiffly by the door, and the judge, a stern-faced man with graying hair, sitting high on his bench. And then there was her, a 14-year-old girl, small and fragile-looking, sitting at the defendant's table. Her name was Emily, and she looked out of place, like a child who had wandered into a world far too big for her. The case was a custody hearing. Emily's parents were divorced, and the court was deciding who she would live with. Her mother, a kind but tired-looking woman, sat nervously in the front row. Her father, a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper glare, sat across the room. Emily hadn't said much throughout the proceedings. She kept her head down, her dark hair falling like a curtain over her face, hiding her eyes. But when the judge finally addressed her directly, asking if she had anything to say, she stood up. At first, her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I don't want to live with either of them," she said. The room went still. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Young lady, you need to understand that the court is here to decide what's best for you. This isn't about what you want, but what's in your best interest." That's when it happened. Emily's head snapped up, and for the first time, everyone could see her face. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears, but there was something else in her expression: anger, pain, and something deeper, something raw. "You don't care about what's best for me," she shouted, her voice trembling but loud enough to echo off the walls. "You're just like them. You're the killer." The room froze. The judge's face went pale, and the lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Even the bailiff, who had seen it all, looked stunned. Emily's mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Her father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "What did you say?" the judge asked, his voice low and cautious. Emily's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "You're the killer," she repeated, her voice breaking. "You're killing me. Every time you make me go back there, every time you act like you know what's best for me when you don't even care, you're killing me." The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could shatter. Emily's words hung in the air, heavy and unignorable. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the judge leaned back in his chair, his stern expression softening. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, as if trying to wipe away the weight of her words. "Emily," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. I didn't realize." But Emily wasn't done. "No one realizes," she said, her voice cracking. "No one ever realizes until it's too late." And with that, she sat back down, her shoulders shaking as she cried. The room stayed silent, the kind of silence that comes when everyone knows something important has just happened but no one knows what to do next. The judge cleared his throat, but for the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. The lawyers looked at each other, then at Emily, then at the judge. Even the air felt different, charged with something unspoken. In that moment, it wasn't just a custody hearing anymore. It wasn't about legal arguments or court procedures. It was about a 14-year-old girl who had been carrying a pain too big for her to hold, and who had finally found the courage to let it out. And as she sat there, crying quietly, the courtroom felt smaller somehow, as if her words had stripped away all the formality and left only the truth. The judge adjourned the hearing shortly after that, saying they would reconvene the next day. But as everyone filed out of the room, it was clear that something had changed. Emily's words had cut through the noise, through the legal jargon, through the walls everyone had built up, and for the first time, maybe, someone was listening. As Emily walked out of the courtroom, her mother reached for her hand, but Emily pulled away. She didn't want comfort, not yet. She just wanted to be heard. Her father lingered behind, his face unreadable, but for a brief moment his eyes met hers. There was something there, regret, maybe, or guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Outside the sun was shining, but Emily barely noticed. She felt drained, like all the energy had been sucked out of her. But there was also a strange sense of relief, as if a weight she had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a voice. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next day, the hearing resumed, but the atmosphere was different. The judge spoke more gently, the lawyer seemed more cautious, and even Emily's parents seemed to be trying harder to listen. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. And for Emily, that was all she had ever wanted: a chance to be heard, and a chance to be free. As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself in a new routine. She was placed in a temporary foster home, a place where she could breathe, where she could finally be herself without fear. Her foster parents were kind, patient people who understood that healing takes time. They didn't push her to talk, but they were always there when she needed them. Emily started seeing a therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Patel, who helped her untangle the knots of anger and sadness that had been building inside her for so long. It wasn't easy. Some days Emily didn't want to talk at all, but slowly she began to open up, to let the pain out in small, manageable pieces. Her parents, too, began to change. Her mother started attending parenting classes and therapy sessions, determined to understand where she had gone wrong. Her father, though still distant, began to show up for their supervised visits, his sharp edges softened by the weight of Emily's words in the courtroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Emily still had bad days when the pain felt too big to carry, when the memories of the past threatened to pull her under. But on those days, she reminded herself of the courtroom, of the moment she had stood up and spoken her truth. She reminded herself that she was stronger than she thought, that she had a voice, and that she mattered. And as she walked through the halls of her new school, her head held a little higher, her steps a little lighter, Emily knew that she was going to be okay. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had survived the storm, and now she was learning to dance in the rain. Hey everyone, if this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you why we need to keep having these conversations, please take a moment to like this video. It really helps spread awareness. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Let's talk about it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're here to share real, powerful stories that need to be heard. Lastly, share this with your friends and family. The more people who see this, the more we can bring awareness and change. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Let's keep pushing forward, together.